What are the benefits of going barefoot? Okay, everything. If you don't, your body works like this. Every cell works like this. If we don't stress it, if we don't use it, the body gets rid of it. It doesn't have a use for it. So if I'm constantly covering up my feet, if I'm constantly putting a buffer, even as thick as my hand, between my foot and the ground, I have no connection to the ground. I just have a connection to what is that layer between my foot and the ground, which means I'm not feeling a lot of things. Most of the people that we see today are dealing with highly dysfunctional feet. We typically can pick up on most issues we're going to see in an athlete or a person just by looking at their feet and seeing what's going on with those feet. Are they actually using their feet? Okay. One of the things I do when I first meet somebody that comes to me for a consult or whatever is I'm watching the way they're walking, and I'm watching how their feet are working, and shoes are not. And the fact is when I see the way they're walking, most of the time it's not using those feet. So there's no real connection to the ground. And by that, when I actually use my feet and generate torque, you can see this really well in sprinters. And since the Olympics just happened, there's a lot of video out there on like Usain Bolt, the 100 meters, 200 meters, all these sprinters doing a lot of this stuff because it's a very sexy sport, or it's a very sexy event, right? Well, all these guys actually generate a ton of torque, and I'm doing that kind of right now through my hip, which also works through my foot. And Dr. Kelly Starrett has really put a stamp on understanding this stuff and getting this out there. The fact is when I generate torque, I'm actually using my foot to be able to create the application of body weight to that. So if I'm not connected to my foot, so if I'm rolling out to the side, right? Like if I squat or I'm deadlifting or I'm even walking or running, people who complain about sides of their feet, like landing supinated, like this, there's no real connection to generate this ability to create an arch, which is also torque. So when I'm walking around, I'm actually using my toes, and you can see my toes get white. So the tops of these things are getting white here, right? Where I'm gripping the ground and I'm using the ground so that I have a connection up through my hips as I'm doing that. This is one of the first signs that we look at, and we see a lot of MMA athletes who have collapsed arches, which means we know they're not really using their hips as much. So if you've got some collapsed arches or you've got flatter feet, we want to teach you how to get those feet back up and use those feet accordingly, and which in turn is us using the hip. So this all comes down to having really strong, mobile feet that allow you to interact with the ground. And it just so happens that the more time I've spent in bare feet, the less I'm dealing with anything upstream of that. Okay, where when I spent a lot of time in shoes and running and cycling and doing triathlon and ultramarathon and a lot of these things, I inevitably ended up breaking down a lot of things that didn't necessarily need to be broken down. And I can still run now, and although occasionally I run barefoot, I am mostly barefoot when I walk around and when I'm just doing things. And it's because I want that connection to the ground. I want to understand where my body weight is versus trying to compensate through that stuff. And compensation becomes something where if I'm not using my foot to actually get grounded through the ground, I'm trying to compensate in order to do the same thing that I would be doing if I could generate torque or I could actually use that foot. And it just so happens that the arch of my foot stays up when I'm actually connected through that foot. And my toes actually widen out, and we can see that through my toes, and that they don't actually touch anymore. They used to touch. So when I was running a lot and I wasn't doing a lot of barefoot stuff, my toes actually all touched. And my pinky toes actually were sitting over the tops of my other toe, like that. And so that's literally started to go away, and my feet have widened out, and I've become more comfortable, and I've been able to mitigate a lot of the mobility issues that I've had too. So it's kind of like just any type of training and trying to understand your body. And the fact is that there aren't too many people I don't know who have not transitioned over to some more barefoot way of life that are complaining about things. They're not complaining about as many things as we are seeing with people who are wearing shoes all the time. So I understand you've got to go to work. I understand you've got to be in places where shoes are necessary. When you're not in those situations, try and be barefoot.